Here's 10 mistakes that we notice ball python breeders and owners make. At number 1 is something I've said many times before, and it is people not doing their research. Research can theoretically eliminate this entire list because the research would be essentially this list, and then some, because this isn't every single mistake people make, clearly. But to do no research or very little research is a little irresponsible. The animal could pass away and die if you don't do your research properly. Now, ball pythons in general are very hardy creatures. It's gonna take a lot of neglect for you to actually successfully kill them in most cases, but those things can add up over time and things do go wrong, so you should have all your ducks in a row and have done all your research. One thing to note is that doing research from just one source also isn't sufficient. Look at opposing viewpoints. Look at all viewpoints and find out what works for you. Number 2, and one of the things I see the most, and one of the things that I'm a little guilty of as well, is overloving your snake. These animals experience stress in a way that we can't even imagine. They're very paranoid creatures and they just want to feel safe. Get used to this term. It's called anthropomorphism. It is when we assign human characteristics to an animal. And it is so common that we think that we know what animals need, that they need love and attention. Your mammal friends, maybe to an extent, but in general, most reptiles, especially snakes, prefer solitude and safety, and they will tolerate you, often to a very large extent, but if you're handling them at all times during the day, they're going to get stressed out very quickly, and it can actually lead to some serious health concerns. You might not think that you are causing it harm because you don't mean to cause it harm, but you are. If you handle shortly after eating, or even within a couple days sometimes after eating, they have not fully digested, and there is a higher likelihood that they are going to regurgitate their food. That can lead to a train wreck and a tumbling snowball of effects, because you might try to feed them again next week and you didn't do your research. Point 1, that you should wait 2 weeks after regurgitation to attempt to feed again, and often it might cause them to go off food anyways. Now it regurgitates again, and now you're starting to cause a snowball effect of a major problem and create a major health concern for your animal, all because you loved it too much. With all that being said, I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't love your reptile and that it's just a cool little accessory. In fact, I'm saying quite the opposite. It's a living animal and you should love it. They will tolerate you and they will get comfortable with you and used to you, but they will still get stressed out if they do not get solitude and peace. We'll put a card up here on our video on if a reptile is even capable of loving you, at least in the traditional sense that us humans might consider love. Number 3 would be finding a vet. Most people probably don't do this. There are plenty of vets around you, I'm certain, but do they handle reptiles? And if they do, are they actually good? We're blessed with having a very good reptile vet near us. I don't see them very often because I take care of my animals, but I have had to go there in certain situations. They know what they're doing. So research your vet and make sure that you have one. Some vets might tell you to give them an antibiotic for every little problem. That's a bit of an issue because it's not really gonna help the snake. So find a vet that actually knows and cares about reptiles. It's not something that you should need all the time, obviously. You don't need to run there for every little thing, otherwise you'll be broke. But if you need to, you should have an emergency contact on hand to help care for your animal. The number 4 mistake that I see a lot is the wrong enclosure size. More often than not, I see people get brand new baby hatchlings and they'll throw them in a 40-gallon enclosure and wonder why it will not eat. I think that it can work for a hatchling ball python to be put in a 40-gallon tank, but it's gonna take some work. It's gonna take you putting a good amount of hides in there, probably more than your standard 2, one hot, one cold. That's a lot of space for such a small animal at that time. But if you don't put in the work, they're going to get stressed out. You can put these smaller hatchlings in a relatively small environment and they will eat perfectly fine for you. With that being said, this kind of teeters into the tub versus tank debate. My thing is this: if tubs work for you and your animals are healthy and eat well, good. If tanks work for you and your animals are healthy and eat well, good. Do what works for you. But make sure that it works. But the long and short of this is make sure that you're picking the right enclosure size. Stress is a real thing. At the same time, you don't want to pick something that's obviously crazy small for them. They should be able to go to a warm side and a cool side. If they cannot do that, then it's too small. Outside of that, just find out what works for you, whether it be tanks, tubs, it doesn't matter. Don't listen to crazy negative influences. Just do what works for you. Number 5 would be picking the wrong substrate. A lot of people just end up throwing their snake on aspen. This can technically work so long as you do a little bit of extra work, and that would be to provide them with a humid hide that they can escape to. And remember, as they grow older, that humid hide is going to need to increase in size. I use cocoa husk, and I've seen a lot of other people use cypress mulch. These are great because they hold their humidity, but they don't get too crazy wet. They hold a lot of water without actually having standing water in there. That's never good. You don't want too much humidity, especially if it gets cold. That's a recipe for giving your snake a respiratory infection. You want it to be a substrate that typically holds moisture and won't mold while doing so. Aspen will mold if it gets wet over time. So for a ball python that needs a little bit more humidity, I don't necessarily recommend aspen. I have also used paper towels in the past, and those can be a bit of a pain because you have to get them wet like nearly every single day. A couple things that you certainly don't want to use is pine or cedar. These are terrible for snakes. These are more for barnyard animals. I could be wrong about that too, because I'm not researched on those, but in general, I know for all the animals I keep, you don't keep them on pine or cedar typically. So pick the right substrate that's going to give your snake a healthy humidity level. Number 6 would be getting too many animals too quickly. I see a lot of people get really excited and go headlong into this. And even if you've done the proper amount of research, and even if you have all of your setups right, you're still untested. I would recommend getting at least 1 for a year to play safe. But if you really gotta hurry, if you're really just wanting to get into this breeding business or you can't stop, at least keep 1 for a couple months. Once you've known that you can succeed with 1 ball python, then theoretically, if you copy paste that to all the other ball pythons, you should be successful. Keeping in mind that every individual is different and that they might eat a little differently. But one of the major downsides to getting too many animals too quickly is being overwhelmed. It's not hard to keep a bunch of ball pythons, but as you get more and more and more and more, the stresses add up, and it usually comes all at once at you. If you have to feed, then it's just 1 day typically you're feeding, so it's 1 full day that you're dedicating to feeding, say 70 snakes. And if all those snakes have different appetites and different prey, or if they don't eat, then you're keeping baby rats then. So just consider all of that. The other major consideration of bringing in too many animals too quickly is diseases, whether that be mites, respiratory infections, the dreaded nidovirus. It doesn't matter. If you're bringing in a bunch of animals, you're not going to be able to source maybe where a problem came from, and suddenly you're going to have a huge problem on your hand, and it's going to infect your entire collection. And that adds to that overwhelming part, because now maybe 1 snake that had an issue becomes 10 snakes that have an issue. So don't get too big too quickly. Let yourself grow over time. Have a plan in place for bringing new animals in. We call this quarantine. You should make sure that your animal isn't sick. You should certainly just check them over for mites. We did a video on how to prevent mites and deal with them that we can place right here that you can check out if that ends up being a problem. But as a spoiler for that video, the best prevention for mites or any disease is to not bring them into your collection to begin with. So have a plan in place and realize that you're responsible for that in the end. And if you cheat a little, then it's going to be you that has to answer for it and has to deal with the consequences. Number 7 would be putting money over what matters. First off, there's nothing wrong with getting into this for money. I don't understand why people think that someone who wants to make money is evil. If that's their only reason for being into this, that's a shame in my opinion, because these are beautiful animals. But so long as they are providing proper care for their animals, I don't think it's a problem. With all that said, putting money over what matters, that would be the lives and care of your snakes, which is exactly what I said at the beginning. Your primary objective can be to make money, but your primary goal to making money should be that the snakes are healthy. Putting the money over that would actually be a detriment in my opinion anyways. Fact of the matter is that these are not product, not in the traditional sense. They're sold by breeders like me, like they are, but they're not. They are alive. So unlike a phone, I have to have a bit more care in what I do when I care for these animals. Personally, I think it's a detriment that anyone would get into this just for money, because people can sense that. Again, I don't think it's a necessity, but even if that's your goal, is to make money, it should not overshadow care of the snakes. You have to provide the care for these animals, and if you cannot do that, please do not get into breeding. Number 8 would be double and triple checking your husbandry. I've had plenty of times where my thermostat told me one thing, but my temperature gun told me another. Sometimes they don't get to the right temperature because when you have your thermostat probe on heat tape, it's getting a different temperature than what's going on in your ball python's tank. It is crazy to me how sometimes in the past I've had stuff set at 90, temps at 85. I think, what's going on here? I bump it up 1 degree to see what happens. I come back, it's 95 degrees. These are real things that have happened to me. And it's things that I've had to go look at, whether it's the heat tape malfunctioning, the thermostat malfunctioning. You need to double and triple check when you're doing all of this. Get a temperature gun and check. Make sure that you're looking with your eyes for humidity issues. So checking your humidity, actually observing your snake. But remember, don't overdo it. Check them once, twice a day. Doesn't mean you gotta pick them up each time either. Remember their stress level. So you're looking and you're cleaning at the same time, but don't be too invasive in their home. And to drive home that point, we recently had an issue with our incubator that we thankfully caught. We think it was between 4 hours to as much as 12. When checked in the morning, our thermostat looked fine. It read our 89 degrees for the incubator. When I got home from work, I went in just to check my eggs, and the incubator said 70 degrees. When I'm gone, my brother is here almost all the time, and there are 2 things that should have alerted to him that something was going wrong. For one, the thermostat itself should have gone off. If something is wrong with the temperature, there's an alarm on there that starts beeping. This did not happen. Now, when checked, the temperature was still set for 89 degrees. So why did it stop heating, and why did it not tell me that the temperature had dropped? Well, that would be the second thing that should have alerted me that there was a problem. Our power brick, which is a battery backup power brick, should have started beeping like crazy. I've seen this thing go off and it is loud. It warns you when there's a power fluctuation, or if the power in general goes out, it starts beeping intermittently, that it's giving away energy and that eventually will run out, obviously. It still showed that it was providing power, but something had gone wrong with it, which caused the thermostat to malfunction. Basically didn't provide enough power. I know that sounds weird, but that's the crazy part, that this could have happened to begin with and basically disabled 2 alarms that should have alerted my brother, who was mere yards away from it. When I came home, I make a habit of checking these things. So a visual audit is what caught it. Number 9 would be freaking out when your ball python does not eat, especially when you first just got them or when they're an adult. Ball pythons are notoriously picky eaters. It is perfectly fine. Now, during this, you want to make sure that the reason is not because of husbandry, because you're stressing them out, because the substrate's wrong, because the temperature's wrong, so on and so forth. You do want to make sure that your husbandry and that your care is spot on. Use that as an opportunity to audit yourself, but don't freak out. And I know that's hard to do. I can't go 8 hours without having a meal without feeling like I'm going to die, but they can go years, and that's not a joke. Reptiles don't need to eat as much, and sometimes they decide to go off food for any various reason, whether it be that they were spooked or they just don't feel like eating for a while. It's completely normal. I have most of them go at least on a small hunger strike throughout the year, whether it be maybe just 1 month, which is no big deal, or some of them that haven't eaten for me now in about 6 months. I once had one about 9 months, I think it was. During that time frame, it lost 10 grams. And on that, you want to monitor their weight during this occasionally, just making sure that they're not dropping massive amounts of weight. They should still be provided water, obviously, because they'll die if you don't. As long as they're consuming water, you're going to see that they don't drop very many pounds, because they can go long periods of time without food. It's a trade-off though, because they can't really do very well when the temperature changes. But don't freak out, because that freak out will then cause you to go back to our second point, which is loving them to death. You'll overcorrect and cause them even more stress, and then you might actually get a real problem. And at number 10 would be something that can kill your snake theoretically in the matter of hours. And that would be that if you feed live, do not leave it overnight, and monitor, quite frankly, when you're live feeding. You can close the tub, but when you hear the squeak, make sure that your ball python has a proper wrap and is not being bitten up and hurt by your rodent. Because I've had snakes bite and wrap only the tail of a rodent to have that rodent then freak out and head for biting the snake. And they are strong biters, far stronger than a ball python. And ball pythons don't have the ability to get away. So a lot of people don't want to feed live because of this. But the problem is that ball pythons in general typically feed better on live. That's not always the case, and you can certainly make a case for feeding only frozen thawed. But if you do feed live, the important thing is to monitor and be ready with tools to separate the rat from the snake, should you need to, and be aware if your snake does not eat that you need to remove it. If you doubt what I'm saying, just Google ball python rat attack. You can find images of snakes that have been quite literally eaten by their prey overnight. Go through every single tank again. This might seem tedious and time consuming, but it's a lot better than losing an animal to a rodent that cost you $4 maybe, and was supposed to benefit your snake and now has killed it. And I know I said that this was a list of 10, but I have one more tip for you. And that would be to both listen to people's advice and not to listen to people's advice. What I mean by that is try to listen to people who build you up. Don't listen to people who want to tear you down. If people have negative things to say and they're doing it in aggressive ways, maybe you can take a little bit of criticism from them and try to pick the bones out of that. But quite frankly, most of those people should be blatantly ignored, because there's plenty of good people out there that will give you what is called constructive criticism in this case too. Hey, this is what works for me. This is why I don't do it that way, but if that works for you, something along the lines of that. Feedback that is negative in nature and less constructive in nature is going to sound accusatory. It's going to focus typically on your character. There will typically be some name calling, and it will be very aggressive and very extreme. Not everyone is going to agree, and that's perfectly fine, but I don't think it's okay when someone lumps everyone together in a certain group and assigns them a certain name. It's typically, again, a very childish way to deal with something that you may think is an issue. So don't be that person either. Be someone who builds someone up. Now, this isn't to go with common sense. If you're giving your ball python Diet Pepsi and someone says, "What the hell are you doing?" That's common sense. You deserve that. In the end, if your animals are healthy and they eat fine, what's the problem? I hope you enjoyed the video. You can actually check out some of our videos that we've done on care of ball pythons right here. There's eggs in the incubator. So a visual audit is what caught it. That rhymed. I didn't mean for it to rhyme, but hey, it works.